And so thanks to everybody joining this call today. I know I'm excited to share some tasty treats from here. And this is my husband, Daniel, my culinary muse. And between the two of us, we have an 8-acre teaching farm here in suburban Woodinville, Washington. Anything you else want to say by introduction?
No, just thank you to 21 Acres and thank you all for tuning in. It's a pleasure to be able to share some of our stories from what we've learned over some years of living on a farmstead. It's a farm in that we feed more people than ourselves, and it's a homestead in that we live here and we're in the center of the garden at all times. So we try to distill the essence, like getting the nutrition out of bone broth of these teachings and pass those on in a way that's digestible. I hope it works today.
Nice pun. So I'm going to show you a few ways of dealing with small creatures today, just to encourage you to eat them and empower you to deal with the whole animal in your kitchen. Yeah, and broths are my favorite. Daniel's going to bow out. Daniel, do you happen to have any gizzards around, or did I freeze all the gizzards? And that'll be frozen. Okay, Daniel might come up with some gizzards. So to orient you here, I'm going to process a rabbit, or show you kind of a whole rabbit and a whole chicken. And these cover two basic mammalian groups pretty well. Like if you know how to deal with a chicken, you know how to deal with a pigeon, and you know how to deal with a turkey. It's pretty much a matter of scale. And same thing with a rabbit. Very basic vertebrate, body plan. And I really wish that we had done this kind of stuff in high school biology instead of dealing with the frogs and formaldehyde scene. Like learning how magnificent these bodies are is really an honor. And I'm certainly not here to convince anyone to eat meat. I was vegan for 10 years, and I really appreciate eating ethically, whatever that means for you and your bioregion. So this is how do I get the maximum nutritional mileage out of an animal? And it's nutritious. Like a lot of the parts of the animal that aren't typically sold in stores or aren't typically considered food here in our, in at least the culture I grew up in, they are super nutritious and they are worth eating. So that's what I'm here to tell you about today. I also know that eating a whole animal is a lower cost way to get that nutrition. I'm an animal producer, and it is cheaper and easier to give consumers a whole animal and let them deal with it. And then we don't have to take the time to part it out. So a lot of farmers, pastured poultry producers and people like that will be able to sell whole animals on the day of processing according to the Washington state regulations. And you can just go home with whole animals and then deal with them the way you want. And so that's also nice. It's a cost-effective way to get a lot of nutrition. Dealing with the animals ourselves as wholly as we can also minimizes pollution in all the places that process animals. Animals are very nutritious, like for us or for bacteria. So if a large quantity of animals is getting processed someplace else, there are usually waste products that need to be managed somehow. And when we're doing that on the farm or in our home, we're in charge of how those pollutants are managed. And last but certainly not least, it is a respectful way to use these animals. We killed these rabbits and these chickens right here on our farm, and we are very cognizant of the fact that they're not going to wake up the next day. Storm was over here yesterday at our farm doing a respectful harvest class of how do you start with the live animal to make chicken soup. So whether we're processing the animals ourselves or whether we get them from a local producer, it's just worth acknowledging that, wow, okay, if I had to explain to this chicken that I didn't want to eat her feet just because I think they're gross, I don't know if she would really buy that. She's like, hey, I'm giving up a lot here for you. Can you just go ahead and eat the feet? So respect for the animal is really important here. And I would rather eat 1 or 2 well-raised animals per month than eat, multiple ill-raised animals per week. Like meat can be a flavoring, especially when we're talking about eating somebody like an old laying hen, you know, or a squirrel. Like those are some very flavorful animals. And I find my needs for animal products met well with just a little bit of meat when I'm using the whole animal. So those are a few reasons of why the whole animal, and a little bit about why a small animal. It's just easy to manage, it's easy to store. That's how I like to do it. That's why we raise rabbits and chickens, because we can metabolize them well on our homestead. Any questions on why the whole animal, or everybody's kind of bought into the idea?
I see some heads nodding yes.
Okay.
And some smiles.
All right. So the next idea is sourcing. So one thing to do is to raise your own, which I know is feasible for some people and not for others. I know when I went from being a vegan to wanting to eat meat again, I wanted to raise my own and be involved with that process. So that's what I've done. It's a lot of people have backyard chickens, and you have to have some kind of retirement plan for your hens after a few years. I mean, whether it's that you're going to keep them forever, but they're not going to lay very efficiently for you after a few years. And rabbits are a typical traditional backyard animal. They're quiet, they're easy to keep. I love, love, love rabbits. And we have at any given moment about 100 rabbits here, and we sell rabbit, we breed a lot of rabbits, and they're fantastic. And they eat what we can grow here. They eat a lot of the greens from the farm. So raising your own is an option if that's an option for you, and you have any questions or want to flag me down later about that, happy to cheer you on. There are lots of local farms. You can check out, I think Seattle Tilt has a farm finder where you can enter in, hey, I'm looking for local meat. So there are lots of online ways to connect with farmers and say, hey, I'm willing to come and pick up chickens on your butchering day and make life easier for you and fill my freezer with good food. So check out some local farms. The 21 Acres Farm Market is also connected with some great local farms. So good places to check out. And then there's gleaning, which can look like a lot of things. We've gotten a reputation as a place where people can bring roosters. So probably an average of a bird a week shows up here for us to process. And sometimes that's welcome. Sometimes it's a little more of a hassle, but it is a flow of meat, and it is an available meat source in the area if you want to do your own processing. And I never thought that 20 years ago I would do this, but now if there's a safe way to stop and pick up roadkill, let me tell you, I have brought home several squirrels, rabbits, and whether we eat them or whether our poultry eat them, I don't want to let protein just disappear into the roadside or pollute a stream when it could actually be incorporated into the nutrient cycles on the farm. So few ways to get your critters. One thing that I'm really going to recommend for you as you are taking apart animals is a sharp knife. Anytime that you invest in learning how to keep a knife sharp, like that just paves the way for your critter processing adventures. Like you really need a good tool for the job. Does not have to be a fancy knife. This is like a $20 knife, but we just keep it sharp and it's ready to go, and it really makes all the processing that much easier. So I'm going to show you the chicken foot trick and then show you the broth making process and what that's like. So when I used to process chickens at home in my early days of just kind of stumbling along, teaching myself doing that, I would take the chicken feet, the dirty barnyard chicken feet, and I would just like scrub them with a toothbrush until I thought they were clean enough, and then I would throw them into the broth. And it didn't kill me, but my grandmother said, why don't you just do what my mom did? And you dip them in hot water to peel them. So that's what I'm gonna do in case you ever get in case you're doing your own processing. This was such a game changer for me that's why I wanna show it to you. So I want to take off the foot and you'll see all her tendons kind of crunch down and her toes will get all floppy. So here I have a chicken foot. And that's out of the barnyard. Daniel was kind of horrified that I put these chicken feet in the fridge overnight, but I wanted to be able to show you. Next up, I take a pot of hot, almost boiling, but not quite boiling water. I'm going to take that chicken foot, plop it in, swirl it around. If the water is really hot, I want to make sure I don't leave it in there too long. I don't want to cook the foot. It's just a little dip. And now, Now this part is like the combination between picking off a scab and peeling a sunburn and taking off a sock. Like I can just use my thumbnail and peel off the skin of the chicken foot. And it is very, very satisfying. So this, I'm trying to see how the lighting can be better here. Or if I can hold it right up to the camera. So you can see that I think we need less light. It's a little overexposed. You see how it's taking off the scaly skin. And all that dirt is coming off. And I can even go down to the toenails and I just twist the toenails. And the toenails pop off. I've definitely had some people get very grossed out by this. Sorry, for sure. I thought, I should give a disclaimer. Like there could be some more grossness than you're used to in the kitchen. But I just peel that chicken foot, pop the skin off of the toes, take those toenails off, and I have a nice clean chicken foot that I'll just rinse and throw into the stock pot. And this is one of your secrets to gelatinous broth. And if we were just talking yesterday, if we had to have one food item, like one animal product in our diets, it would be broth. And the gelatin, the connective tissue in the chicken feet is a great big part of that. This is a really nice rubbery foot. And when that is in broth for a long time in just simmering water for several hours, that gelatin comes out of the foot and into the broth, and that's pretty amazing. So that's the chicken foot trick. And now I'll tell you about broth, which is the magic sauce for sure. And I hand you those if you want to take those feet off, Daniel. So broth is one of the most important animal products that we eat. It's connective tissue and bones. You hear a lot about bone broth, and there's like, what's broth and what's stock, and bone broth is kind of maybe a new word for something that's been around for a long, long time. And connective tissue will dissolve in the water and become gelatin, which if you can picture like a Jello mold, there's kind of this gelatinous structure to the water. And it's proven that chicken broth is good for you, like will help you get over a cold faster. So as part of our immune boosting on the farm, we pretty much always have a nice pot. A nice pot of broth going here, especially throughout the winter. We take the carcasses of the chickens, and you can do this with one chicken, you can do it with two chickens. We take the meat off and we can set the meat aside to grind, to make chicken sausage. We could throw it into the broth if we wanted. And we put this simmering in a great big stock pot overnight. Now I'm going to move the camera a little bit so you can see my gorgeous 5-gallon stock pot here that's simmering away. And this has a whole bunch of chicken carcasses. And while I'm at it, I put in onion skins from the onions I had that day, and couple of carrot tops and a couple of parsnips that look like they're going to be a pain to peel. So I just go ahead and put them in there. This is how many birds I could fit in last night when they were all still tough. But now I just will stuff a few more in there. There's just water and those vegetable scraps in here, plus a little splash of vinegar. And you can use any kind of vinegar you want. I just have like a red wine vinegar. And when I say a little splash, I'm thinking like quarter cup, half cup. Not enough for me to taste like a really sour taste, but just enough to lower the pH enough to draw some of the minerals out of the bones. A lot of people use an Instant Pot for this. We have a housemate with an Instant Pot. She loves it. I just don't have experience with that, but there are worlds of people who do. So I'm sure you can find that info if you have an Instant Pot and want to use it. I've just always been a stock pot gal because that's my era. So I'll smush all the chicken bones together and put them in there and let them simmer. And you could do the same thing with a rabbit. You could do the same thing with a squirrel. You could do this, obviously you don't have to make 5 gallons at a time. A gallon or 2 is great. We just have a big household of broth eaters. And the other secret is I roasted these carcasses just until they got a little crispy in the oven. And that really deepens the flavor. That starts browning the proteins. That gives me a yummier broth, but it's not required at all. So if you have the time and energy and you want to clean another pan, go ahead and roast them. If you don't care, no biggie. You can roast them or not roast them. Some of it depends on what you want to use the stock for. If I want to just be drinking it straight or with a little miso or salt in it, I'll often brown the bones. If I'm going to be using it in a soup where I'm adding a lot of other ingredients, I won't roast the bones. And it also just depends on if I want to clean another pan that day, honestly. So yeah, that is the story with chicken broth. So these are old laying hens and they give the tastiest broth. Like it is truly superlative, their flavor. Grocery store, like kind of young chickens just can't compare. But these ladies are super tough. And that's one reason why we either grind the meat or really turn it into broth. You can also see on here that there's all this golden fat coming off of the top. There's just like ladlefuls of this golden fat. And we save that into jars that we can freeze. And then we just pull this out and use it instead of other oils. So this is one of our main cooking fats. And since it takes a fair amount of effort to get it, we're pretty sparing with using it. But that's good. Overall net health benefit. Any questions on stock, etc.?
Wait, if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask, and if not, then I do have a question, but I'll wait for folks.
Quick question about does the fat mostly just rise to the top and then you skim it off with, what do you use to skim it off with?
Oh, great question. So I just use a ladle and it's a little tricky because you see how pure this fat is, like there's no water in the bottom of this jar. Whereas if I'm skimming it off of the top of a soup, it's liable that I'm going to wind up with a little bit of water, broth in the bottom of my jar if I just go pour this in. So I either have to skim it off very carefully and not get water in the jar, or skim it off a little less carefully and then just use that fat sooner. There are lots of fat separator tools where you can put in where you can kind of skim the top, put all that in a broth separator, and you'll have a little spout that will take the broth off from the bottom. So a couple of strategies, but basically you don't want to store fat with water in it because that's where mold will happen, where decomposition will happen. Daniel did the amazing trick last night of rendering fat because we had butchered all our old lang hens who had like big globs of fat inside of them. And that stuff is gold. So we pulled that out, chopped it into pieces, and I had this whole cast iron frying pan full of bits of fatty tissue and fatty bits of chicken skin. And then we just put that on the wood stove, like nice gentle warmth, and the fat came out of those pieces of tissue, and we could skim that off very cleanly. So you can render fat if you have enough fatty tissue from an animal, and or you can skim it off the broth. You just have to be careful about not getting water in it, not storing it with water in it, whichever method you choose.
Could you wait until it cools and the fat starts to solidify on the top and then skim it? Or is that bad for food safety reasons?
No, you could, I mean, I certainly do that. It's just still really hard to get it off without liquid, you know? And it all depends on how much fat is on the top. So what I'll often do is I'll fill a jar that's like really clean, beautiful fat with no drops of liquid. And I store that one in the, you know, for multiple months. And then I'll get another jar that has a little bit of broth in the bottom. I put it in the fridge and I say, let's use this one up first. And if we use it within, you know, a week or two, that's fine.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Great question. Thank you.
That was a
Okay.
great question. I also have one about
Yeah.
so for storing the bird carcasses or the rabbit carcasses, is would you want to ideally use them the same day, or could you put them in the freezer for an amount of time? I might have missed that if you had mentioned it.
No problem. I didn't mention it. So these are all birds that we butchered yesterday. And we're cooking them right away because we don't have a ton of room in the freezer, and we just wanted to get them processed all the way through. So yeah, you can totally freeze carcasses. For a lot of people, it just comes down to a matter of freezer space and follow through. Because how easy is it, let's be honest, people, to put something in the freezer and forget all about it? So sometimes it's easier to just see it all through. And you can freeze the carcass, like if you know that you're going to be getting one chicken every 2 weeks, you know, from the local farmer, and you want to save up all those carcasses, great, you can do that. You can store those carcasses in the freezer. You can also make the broth and then store the broth in the freezer. We don't buy yogurt, so we have to buy, you know, like bag yogurt containers off of friends. This is a great container to store broth in because you can plunk out a big frozen chunk of broth easily right into your soup. So you can store broth in the freezer. It takes up a lot less space than carcasses. Yeah. Oh yeah. Daniel showed us here's a full one right here. Yum. And this is like, to have it in the freezer is quite convenient as long as you've got the freezer space. The other thing we do is can it. And now broth, you have to pressure can. I know I talked in my tomato class about being able to water bath can tomatoes. You have to pressure can chicken broth because it's not acidic. All those meat products you need to pressure can. And I was terrified about pressure canning for a long time, but I just like read the manual and gave it a try. Daniel, can you whisk these chickens right out of here? And presto, I just got a new gasket for this.
Wow.
And I can chicken broth. And so canning chicken broth is a little more involved. You know, I have to sit here for 90 minutes watching the pressure gauge. But on some rainy winter days, it's actually pretty welcome activity. And then I have a jar of broth that's sealed and that's shelf stable. You know, this is rabbit broth. It says rabbit 520 on there. So I can this in May, and I'll just make sure to use it up before the next May. It would keep for longer, but might as well do that. I think there is some nutritional loss in pressure canning. I mean, I have something, you know, above boiling for an hour and a half. So I think it's not quite as nutritious as a fresh broth or a frozen broth, but it does save freezer space it's even more convenient than something that's frozen in terms of using it up. So a couple of different avenues there for storing broth. Yeah. Questions? Oh yeah. Okay. So if you don't have a pressure canner, I'm not saying you have to jump out and pressure can stuff. I'm just saying it's an option for storing broth if you're going to be making big batches of it at a time. So yeah, something to look into if you're interested.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to mention we're at 1:33 just for a time estimate.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Let's see. I might deal with this little friend right here. So, this is let's see. Maybe I'll talk about these giblets here too. Daniel found us a couple of gizzards from yesterday. A lot of people get a chicken from the grocery store. Do they even have like the giblets inside anymore? Has anybody bought a chicken and you have a little like package with the gizzard? Do they do that?
I think so, yeah.
Yes? Okay. You can tell it's been a while since I bought a chicken. So that is tasty stuff to add to your stock pot. You probably have strategies for dealing with it, but when we were processing chickens here yesterday, I was telling Storm, I was like, pretty much everything in a chicken is fairly edible. Like I'll reach and I'll pull out a little heart. There we go. I tell you, it's like a treasure trove in there. So a lot of the things that might seem surprising to you, you're like, what is that? When in doubt, brown it and put it in the soup stock, and it will probably be just fine. Like we do that with lungs, ovaries, testicles when we find them in roosters. Like if I've taken out the gallbladder and the intestines, there's nothing that's going to really hurt me. And if it's cooked thoroughly in a soup stock. So that's just to encourage you, like, don't worry about, some of the mysterious giblets. You can totally add them to a soup stock. All the chicken feet, we just pile those into the soup stock and they do just great. Like all the nutrition just simmers right out of them. So rabbit, basic mammal body plan. Can y'all see the rabbit okay? I'm trying to get me and the rabbit in here.
That looks good, yeah.
Okay, great. So a lot of people aren't a fan of the whole rabbit adventure. It's like just a little too much critter for them. But I'm here to encourage you, and that they're a great local meat, and this plan will kind of also work for squirrels or other creatures that you find. Rabbits are full of tiny bones. So what we have done, something as simple as just plunk the whole rabbit into a crock pot, and the meat will get delicious and tender, and you can add some tomatoes or mustard and onions or whatever your favorite rabbit or chicken seasoning is. But you wind up with a lot of little bones in there. So what we do instead is similar to what we did with the chickens we put into the soup stock. We take off the big chunks of meat that are easily accessible, and then we roast the carcasses. We make soup stock with the carcasses, and we eat the muscle meat in a different way, or like eat it the way we would eat chicken meat. So just take off the little rabbit foreleg, and we call these rabbit wings. This is basically analogous to a chicken wing. So we do teriyaki rabbit wings, or they don't have skin on them, of course, but bake them in tomato sauce or all kinds of things you can do. Anything you can do with a chicken wing, with a skinned chicken wing, you can do with a rabbit wing. And then there are the rabbit legs. Again, I wish I'd done this for anatomy class, because these are attached with a ball and socket joint, just like your hip. Just like, this is a very meaty chunk here. There's just one little femur bone going through there, but this is a mouthful. And this would go, I could just brown it and then put it into my tomato rabbit soup right there. And it's got manageable bones. inside that. I'm going to show you the magic jerky flap off of rabbits. So there's the thin muscle along the flank of the rabbit.
It's a little bit low on the camera. Do you mind
Oh yeah.
if you put it closer to your like stomach area? We could see
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
So there's this thin flap of meat that I can just take off the side. We call these Flappy Flanks because now I have this thin sheet of muscle, and I can either use it to, roll around vegetables and make like rabbit rolls, or I can plop this into a marinade, or I can put this into my freezer until I have enough to marinate. I marinate them and make jerky. No need to slice anything. We have rabbit jerky right here. It's a very thin, lean piece of muscle. So that's great for that. And the real meat of a rabbit, or if you're dealing with another, small creature, guinea pig or squirrel, is along the spine. So I can just cut this loin muscle along the spine. And I just slide my knife along the ribs. Oh, I should have taken off this flappy flank. There we go. And now I have what's analogous to a chicken breast. This is a long strip of white muscle. So now I have this, no bones anywhere in there. I can chop this up and use them as stew meat. I can feed this through a grinder to make ground rabbit. We make a lot of sausage. So that's, kind of like a prime muscle meat part of that. And then I have this, once I've taken off the legs, I have this carcass that I can brown and add to the stock pot. So when in doubt, make stock. It really is one of the most nutritious ways to consume animal products, at least in my experience, and a great thing to do, at this latitude through the winter time. Finding it contributes a lot to health, especially when we throw in ginger root peelings. We can throw in other vegetables to the stock pot. Let's see. Yeah, so I've talked about getting your critters, a little bit about cutting the critters, and making the broth, and then how to store your broth. So I'm trying to think. There's something else I want to say, but I forget it. So are there any other questions that are jumping up or comments on the process here?
One last question. This is wonderful, by the way. Thank you. For the broth, temperature / like just a light bubble, and how long do you simmer for?
Excellent question. Thank you. So and opinions vary around the world and even within this household. So I like a very light simmer, like not a big rolling boil, but a light simmer. For chickens and rabbits, when I've added a splash of that like 1/4 cup of vinegar for this pot, I like overnight. I find that if I leave it much, like that's the peak of delicious flavor. Now I will strain off that broth. Maybe I'll concentrate it down until I have a 7-quart canner load, and I'll can that load. But I still have some bones in here that are still kind of tasty. So I just add water, pack the bones in tighter, maybe throw in a couple of, parsnip tops, and get a second steeping out of it. And then that second steeping broth, that will go for another night, we just drink that up for breakfast, or use it to cook something the next day. So if you've got some good flavorful bones, you can get 2 different steepings. For these small animals, I like an overnight in the stock pot. I know people with instant pots like, boop, do it for a couple hours, or, something that's much faster because they're cooking under pressure. So, but I'm kind of an overnight person. I think if you have beef bones or pork bones, like something that's a much more solid bone, You can go for longer. I've heard people say that like 2 days is kind of a good time frame. But I want to keep things hot enough that I don't have any bacterial spoilage happening without being at a big rolling boil that kind of just clouds the waters. Some broths, depending on your critter, they can form a kind of a scumminess on top. Probably wouldn't hurt you, but if our barn cats will consider it a treat, then we just give it to them. So that's kind of some of my broth making considerations. Definitely, we try to get 2 steepings out of a good batch of bones. Yeah.
Great question, Kristen.
Yep.
I'm wondering what vegetables are the, like, in your experience, are your favorite to put into the broth? It sounds like you said parsnips, onions. What are your solid go-tos?
I really like celery. We started growing celery here this year, and I just love stuffing the tops into broth. Onions, parsnips, beets, kind of all of the root veggies, carrots, especially because those are veggies that I'm usually peeling. And then I wind up with the counter full of carrot peels and I throw them into the soup stock. Like, that's easy. So the soup stock just incorporates whatever veggies are on deck. So often things like, in the summer, we've got zucchini and summer squash tops and tails that go into the broth. And in the wintertime, we've got parsnips and celery root tops that go into the broth. So whatever's on hand. I steer away from cabbage family plants because they're just kind of stinky when they're boiled for a long, long time. Now, don't get me wrong, I love cabbage. And if you saw the sauerkraut class, you know that we're like huge on brassicas. It's just if I'm like trying to boil cabbage stumps for 12 hours, the whole house stinks.
So those veggies would be turnips, rutabagas, cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Those are the stinky ones.
Those are the stinky ones. Now, they make a great broth if you just want to do like a little short broth. Like a little pot of veggie broth to help flavor things. Great, like use them up that way. But when we're talking about boiling something for 8, 10, 12 hours, I stick with non-brassica vegetables. Yeah.
Thank you.
Onion skins are really nice, and onion skins will give your broth a beautiful golden color. Garlic skins just don't seem to have any flavor at all. Yeah. And I don't put any vegetables that I want to actually eat the body of the vegetable into my soup stock, because I'm going to save them for when I actually make a soup. Anything I put in here, like, I just want to extract the nutrients out of it into the broth, strain off the broth, and then make a soup with that broth. So I'm all about kind of just managing the calories, how we're going to get the maximum calories from this particular food, and using products that would otherwise go to waste. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Anything else you want to add, Daniel? You've seen me on here.
Also, we don't, after the soup, after we get all the nutrition out of the bones and out of the veggies, those go out to, so if they're chickens, they'll go out to the duck pen for them to nibble all the protein off the bones. Or if they're rabbits, they go to the chicken pen. So we try to get one more caloric yield out of the same material. And the veggies, the chickens will eat pretty much anything that you cook in there, including other chickens. But we don't necessarily encourage that. But the rabbit bones, they get.
So when we make a big pot of rabbit broth, the chickens feast on the, like once we've strained off the broth. Yeah. There's not really much waste here. So, favorite way to prepare or cook gizzard was the question from Storm. Okay, honestly, Storm, I mostly just throw these into soup stock. Although in my early days of processing chicken, sometimes I'd get a gizzard that was so gorgeous, I just like eat it. but it's really chewy. And for good reason. This is the muscle inside the chicken that grinds their food. So it's just, it works hard the entire life of the chicken. You can probably find recipes for heart and cook gizzards similarly. Again, I just brown them and throw them into the soup stock, or if we're grinding meat, we grind the gizzard, and then the toughness is kind of mitigated in our chicken sausage. So I gotta tell you, my approach is pretty simple. When in doubt, brown it, put it in soup stock. Yeah.
It's a great question.
Oh, yeah.
Where does the gizzard come from? Like, what part of the body does it come from again?
Oh, great. Well, let me pull the chickens back on screen. So yesterday, her heart just fell out. So we removed the chicken's digestive tract, and we process these ladies. It starts up here at the beak and exits down here at the, guess what? Chicken butt. And in the middle there is this ball of the gizzard. So a tube comes into the gizzard with food, and the gizzard chews that food, and then the food progresses along to the intestines. So the gizzard is part of the digestive tract of the animal. Yeah. The mysteries of the, that's why I'm like, we should do this in biology classes,
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the chicken heart, also a very tough little muscle here, a triangular muscle. And yeah, the necks have a lot of great connective tissue in them. Yeah. Okay.
I think like if we were to teach this in school, it'd be so amazing because everyone could have like a giant pot of soup the next day, building community and really learning. Another question from Kristen, which I'm curious about too. Is there a difference between broth and stock?
I made the mistake of trying to look up an answer to that question before this class. And I was basically more mystified than ever, because of course the opinions vary widely. There's everything between, broth is made with bits of meat in it, and stock is made with only bones or only vegetables. So I'm not gonna, make any hard and fast rules about nomenclature. I think you can probably call it whatever you want. I like calling it stock because that's just kind of a good, it's just how I refer to it. Yeah. Maybe it's because I'm just a little like against the term bone broth because it's so hip. I don't know. But whatever you call it, you should eat it. Yeah. So I just want to show these ladies here too. These are two sisters. One's a little plumper and one's a little scrawnier. Our animals are individuals. Like that comes back to that respect piece is, we are consuming these individual animals and they yield a lot of amazing stuff for us. We do the same kind of thing that we do with the rabbits where we take off the wings. And with these ladies, they're going to have some pretty tough wings. Like this is a crock pot kind of cut if we want to do that. Or we could just brown it and plop it into the soup stock. We can also take off legs. And again, it's just a ball and socket joint here on the leg. The wing is a much more complicated joint. No surprise. And I've learned to get a little more ruthless. I mean, after 10 years of being vegan, it was kind of hard to go back to just like getting in there with an animal. So yeah, I guess just do what you need to do. Also, just to reassure you, if you've never taken apart an animal before, or if you're curious about animal processing, a lot of coyotes and bobcats have figured it out before you, and they did not even have YouTube videos to look at. So you're going to be okay. Like, yes, you can try this. So here again is a chicken leg that I can bake, boil. I can take meat off the bones. The legs have much more connective tissue than the breast meat because chickens got to walk around on these things all the time. So legs and feet have so much connective tissue. The closer to the ground, basically, the tougher and the more connective tissue is on that animal. I've gone to deer processing plants, places where hunters bring their quarry, and they're like dumpsters full of deer legs free for the taking. So I just want to make use of that resource, and those legs make incredible broth. Trust your senses. You don't want to eat anything that's passé. I'm just saying, legs are not to be scoffed at. Legs are good food, like we saw with the chicken feet. And I can do the same thing, kind of like I did with the rabbit's back, but with the chicken's breast meat. And then this gets cut up to be either sausage or stew meat. Remember, you're going to need to cook an old bird for a long, long time to make her tender. And also cut this into small pieces, or you're going to be flossing for a very long time. This is like tough strands of fiber, but it is really quite delicious. Daniel likes it ground. We would just grind it, skin and all, and then add a little rosemary and garlic, and make a sausage with it. So if you have access to a meat grinder, or you want to freeze meat until you can take it to a butcher who will usually grind meat for a fee, that's what we've done in the past too, is just save up a bag or two of frozen meat, thaw it for a day, take it to the butcher, and come home with packages of ground meat. So lots of great local resources, definitely encouraging you to make good use of the whole animal. Wow, okay. There's just another minute or two for any last questions or comments on this adventure.
While we wait, I just want to say thank you so much for this amazing, informative class. Of course, it's intimidating when you myself as a consumer, just rely on the butcher and go to get this in a can or something, and it's so much less. It's less scary than I realized it would be, and it's so fulfilling, and it's full of respect for the species, and ourselves too, to feed ourselves really nutritious food and learn from each other. So I'm really grateful that always grateful that you're sharing this with us.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And it really is for, respect for the animals, appreciating their lives. Here at Hawthorn Farm, a lot of these animals, we see them on the first day they're born. We watch them hatch out of the eggs, and then it might sound kind of strange, but consuming them in this way and using all parts of them really nourishes us on so many levels. And really happy to share that with you. And just reminding, like you said, Rianne, doesn't have to be intimidating. Just take your time. You can figure this out. Lots of people have done this before you. And it's an important part of learning to feed ourselves if this journey calls to you. So, hooray. All right. Happy broth drinking, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
I was drooling the whole time. Thank you so much. All right.
All right.
See you next time. Thanks.